also, like the question you ask now, how does it place women? It now demonstrates more than ever that, you know, current histories have tried so much to downplay women's contribution and also women's position in society. And when we look at pottery, it reaffirms the claim, especially in matrilineal communities, how women have always been at the center of driving societies, contributing so much to technology, contributing to human development, but most importantly is the religion and spirituality. Especially in Southern Africa, it's still very evident that societies and communities that were like specializing in the making of pottery, the names used for these people is also the same word used for God, for instance. In Zambia, in the Bemba tradition, the potters are called nakabumba. Bumba is like creating, and it's the same word used to refer to God. So pottery was highly spiritual, and the people that were at the center of it were actually also recognized as spiritual leaders. And when new versions of religions came on, they tried very hard to remove the women in these religious positions, but also in the political positions, such that, you know, this knowledge now, you can't see it unless you get down to pottery. But also, we have made pottery to be like, you know, those kinds of art that is not respected. But when in some of the studies that we have done, especially around Southern Africa, we find that even up to today, the people that make pottery, some of them, they use it for ritual, and it's highly connected to the environment, the way they understood the environment, the way they understood the human behavior, and then interpret that into society activities, and then attach them to ritual. So I've brought one kind of pottery that is used among the Bemba people in the initiation of women, girls to become women or to become mothers. And one kind of pottery that I brought is, this kind of pottery I brought is that it's called a lion. And when you blow into it, it has two holes. When you blow into it, the sound that it makes is exactly the sound of a lion. Now, just imagine somebody making something like this and being able even to produce that sound apart from the other rituals that are related to that. This is a highly skilled work, very spiritual, but which now is not respected.
Thank you so much. A point that I would like for us on the East African community honors to take home is that the contradiction is that, particularly in here, is that some of them communities that make pottery are often, for one, looked down upon. But when you look at West Africa, they're even looked, like Victoria mentioned as gods. Also, the pottery that you mentioned, the one that's making the lion sounds, for those that would like to see it, it's in the gallery behind us. And we'll go back to Laya.
Hello. Can you hear me and see my screen?
Yes.
I am sorry for the issue before. I'll try to be brief because I know that some time has been lost already. So if I move the presentation, you see that, right? Perfect. All right. So trying to be brief. So I've been involved in for the last 2 years in this in a research in the context of Berbera, together with the Resi Foundation, Cultural Foundation, and with the DPU at UCL, on the topic of dwelling Berbera's heritage. The idea has been looking at the different types of Berbera housing to understand the potential that the housing has to inform local adaptive climatic strategies. The idea of the research and the objectives of the research throughout these years have been, first, to promote the conservation of the heritage of Berbera through learning from the different architectural typologies, because it's really rich in different build typologies. but at the same time to learn how do contemporary communities who inhabit those historical or more contemporary housing adapt their daily practice and their everyday life to those diverse building typologies. At the same time, we aimed at analyzing different housing materials, spatial features, and building techniques to ensure the archival and the archival of a building knowledge that is so important for the community. And lastly, to understand how everyday life dynamics of dwellers living in those type of housings are affected by the different environmental aspects of housing, considering how climate change has been lately affecting the communities and the environment in general. Of course, also with that idea, we wanted to map all the replicable and contextual building techniques that can be useful for a future application in architecture. Here I wanted to briefly show the methodology that we've used, and to understand how do we look at contextual built heritage. There are several elements that are so essential. One is the built environment and the spatial qualities of buildings, but another one is, as I was saying, the everyday life of communities, and what are both the material properties and the sociocultural aspects of the dwellers inhabiting those housings, to somehow think of the processes that entail those adaptations to cultural and to environmental aspects. Here there is a brief description of, I show here the methodology that we've employed for the fieldwork research, in which we have mapped out different typologies, considering the Ottoman period throughout the 19th century, some housing typologies throughout the British Protectorate period. Between the housing typologies were built between the 50s and the 60s, and then three also other housings built after the Somali Republic, one in 62 and another more contemporary one in 2001. So this is a bit the different housings that we've been both doing interviews and mapping the materiality and the spatial qualities of the architecture. And the idea was to consider three aspects in the analysis. One was the design and the socio-spatial qualities, the building techniques and materialities, but also which are the climatic strategies that have been used throughout time to build those housing by different communities that have inhabit the dry and warm environment of Berbera. And here I wanted to show just 2-3 examples of how we've gone about that. This is one example of an interesting housing accommodation that is in a neighborhood called Goblanca in Berbera. The accommodation was built in 1983 and is currently inhabited by different communities and dwellers. And it was very interesting to see how a building that was initially a housing accommodation has been adapted to the needs and to the habits of families who currently live in there. For us, it was also very interesting to understand the veranda as a filter to lower up temperatures and to create cross ventilation, which are some of the climatic strategies that could be very interesting to think and to replicate in contemporary constructions. And as an opposite case, this is another case study that we analyzed in Polis Line, always in Berbera. These housing units were built in 1957, and because of the low maintenance and also the idea of wanting to avoid dust and waste inside the houses, most of the windows have been closed, generating a very warm house that both because of the corrugated roof sheets as a roofing material, and because of there's no possibility of cross ventilations, they are currently experiencing very, very high temperatures. So I think it's very interesting, this analysis, to also think how different ways of approaching housing and openings and so on has a big impact in how families actually live in the houses, and how through seasons they have to move out, or how they have to go to the courtyard because the temperatures inside are really warm. The last case I wanted to show is a more contemporary one, which we thought it was very interesting to also see how more contemporary practices are reflected in the way new buildings are designed, and how do they adapt the knowledge and the building technologies to new needs or habits of the communities. And lastly, if I still have a minute, I wanted to show some preliminary conclusions. One is on how spatial constraints somehow limit adaptive strategies, because when there is not much space, families try to adapt creatively to the extreme weather that happens mostly during the warmest months. and how do they have to go on and off sometimes the houses. Also, it was very interesting learning about the social dimension of home and how can that inform also the ways we build houses. And last one was how dwellers have an important role in the preservation of buildings, mostly those who are inhabited by dwellers, and how they constantly contribute with ongoing repairs to keep up the building accessible. And lastly, well, I think this has been acknowledged already, how the value of those heritage is at risk as due to the lack of maintenance and knowledge of traditional techniques. And that's also why I think the research is important, to think, to remember, and to regain the knowledge of building techniques that has been so important for generations. So that would be it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Laia. And my next question would be for Giorgio. You talked about how the heritage sites in Berbera they point to remnants of past societies, past communities, and that had both sociological influence and also religious influence. Informing your conclusion, what would you say about the topic of preserving such heritage sites, also in the context of Berbera? For those of you who've recently visited Berbera, Berbera is becoming more and more such an urbanized city. Not only that, it's becoming the economic hub of this country. So with such a growing city, what was your contribution of your research to the topic of preservation of such heritage sites?
Thank you, Marwad. It's a very thought-provoking question and not an easy one to answer. From the point of view of preservation, I think the research wants still to be a humble one. What we did is what also Laia, what Abdi Fatah remarked. It's been an effort at documenting. There will be a next step in which such documentation, if possible, could also to some extent influence policy if we are able to liaise with local stakeholders and so on and so forth. The idea of documenting them is also to state their importance, is also to acknowledge their relevance. As I was telling you earlier, my understanding of it, and I hope that there could be some level of agreement on that, is that we don't want a city that expands while making a museum of its built heritage. Heritage at this stage in Berbera, but also in Silek, is very much part of contemporary urban dynamics, despite it being dilapidated, despite it being perceived as ruined. Berbera at the moment is developing at two different speeds. One is the new Berbera that is developing closer to the port, with plenty of inhabitants that are coming from different geographies, and with jobs that are increasingly specialized, with residential plots that are increasingly, to some extent, less permeable to the overall urban dynamics. Whereas the older Berbera, closer to the old port, where Darole is, and so on and so forth, keeps being a city that is quite aside such dynamics of transformation. The challenge for us is definitely to try to bridge these two souls, older and newer, in Berbera. But there are some key areas that can be relevant for such operation of bridging. For instance, Shahab is a historical area in Berbera, which happens also to be much closer to the new port, and so on and so forth. There have been attempts by the municipality, also supported by the Berbera Cultural Center, Hargeysa Cultural Center, and Sea Cultural Foundation, in preserving parts of that local built heritage in the Shahab area, as we are also doing efforts in Darole, as you know, the very presence of the Berbera Cultural Center in the newer area of Berbera is trying to make a statement from the point of view of the centrality of culture and also of such memories, such heritage in any future development. We really need to be careful. On one side, if we lose such memories, that is quite a problem. It's a loss that we won't be able to cope with in the future. If we just turn them into museums, we keep the built element, but then all the narratives that are activating them at this stage would inevitably be lost, and that will be equally problematic. I hope this answers your question. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That mostly answers the broader questions. And my question would be for Abdel Fattah now. You gave us a brief discussion on how the history of Sayla in itself, the four stages, the pre-Islamic, the Islamic period, the colonial period, but also, again, the post-independence era. For one, again, going back to the topic of how Berbera is becoming the next, I would say, like the new Sayla in this modern era, how would you say your findings on how would preserving Sayla look like? Or the second question would be should we even preserve Sayla, now that we have beautiful, shiny Berbera?
Thank you, Mawad. I think the conservation of the built heritage in Sayla, actually from the empirical data, we can see that there are numerous factors that are actually affecting the damage and the destruction that the built heritage in Sayla is currently undergoing. And these are including the time, because some of them are really very old, centuries old, with little rebuilding or conservation done. The other factor that we documented is the climate, which is also actually damaging the built heritage of the city. Actually, the change in use, because actually the reason that one building was built during its time and the way it is now used are actually, in most cases, are different, which is actually causing some damage to the historical buildings. Another problem was the inheritance, and in terms of the ownership of the buildings, which goes from one generation to another generation. And in some cases, these historical buildings or built heritage are in the hands of private individuals, making it difficult for, if even the government tries to do some conservation work, it becomes actually challenging. For me, then, when I evaluate those kind of things, I would say where we start the conservation of built heritage in Sayla is the awareness. Because why I say that is because actually during the interviews you can feel that many people are not aware of the historical significance of this building to the history, identity, and how do I say contemporary importance of this building to Somaliland society, or I mean to the humanity in general. So where we start is to raise the awareness of the residents of the city, including public officials, government officials, people who are actually handling these historical buildings, about the significance of this building. It would be a problem if you try to bring a conservation work and then people would simply reply to you, مشروع بس وقعته and لعقته وحنا قصي. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Chama. These are actually the pictures that has been taken during the field work, and you can see the dire situation. You know how this the destruction and the damage that the buildings in the historical buildings in Sayla are currently facing. And if nothing is done, this kind of heritage, which is part of the history and identity of the Somaliland society, will fade away. I don't know if I estimate in the coming decades. And this is not actually an option. I think it must be done. Like, we don't have an option except to do something about this, because these are actually centuries old buildings. This building is one of the buildings that has been built during the colonial era. It was the administration building for the British colonial administration in Sayla. So I think I would say I think the simplest thing and the most important thing that we can do now to conserve and to protect our heritage in Sayla is actually to raise the awareness of the people, try to find sources for investment, and then try to find the knowledge of conservation. Like, you don't call every Wastad or maxaa la yidhahdaa kuuli to do conservation. It needs special knowledge, special technical skills to rebuild this kind of historical, yeah. Whether we can get that from the West or other African states, we need the knowledge for rebuilding and conserving things that has been damaged by the climate, by the people, by the use of the buildings, and so on and so forth. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Abdul Fattah. This question will be for Laya. After that, we'll move on to the questions from the audience. And something that you guys, I think, we've noticed is that the panelists always talked about the need to first recognize, second to be aware, but also how that leads to action. And Laya, my question for you would be how those two cyclical issues, the need for awareness and action, what are the locals' perceptions in Berbera on those two topics? And lastly, how can your findings influence the contemporary building practices in Somaliland?
Thank you. Can I ask you the first question again? I lost you a bit.
The first question would be the two cyclical points that you raised, awareness, the need to be aware, but also the need to take action, and how those two things must be happening simultaneously. What are the locals in Berbera thoughts on those two topics?
Sure, yeah, thank you very much. What is clear here is that local dwellers have been inhabiting those houses for a long time now, and something that it's been very striking to hear is that there's actually a lot of awareness and understanding of the value of the heritage where all those communities live. The problem, as always, is funding and also knowledge to repair maybe infrastructures or techniques that were built in a previous moment where that knowledge has been probably lost. As we've seen in the different case studies that we have analyzed, we have in purpose taken case studies that come from very different backgrounds, built by communities who have been in Berbera throughout time. So the ways in which they have adapted to the local weather and to the habits of those who were inhabiting it are completely different. So that's very interesting to see how local communities inhabiting the housing understand and learn from the ways in which the buildings were built, but also the coping mechanisms they have to adapt their own habits and their own traditions to something that maybe was built for a different purpose or in a different way. So I think what is interesting here is to see how the capacity that we have to adapt to different environments. And I think the newest element to this now is the climate change and how climate is changing so quickly, and how every year coping with temperatures inside the houses or with the storms that create leakings and so on is always more complicated. So I think the awareness exists and the willingness to protect that heritage, but there needs to be a better knowledge about how to repair, how to reproduce those techniques, or how to improve those buildings, as well as, of course, funding programs to allow mostly for the oldest buildings to be preserved. Also because there is a span of time of 200 years between the first case study that we have within the housings and the last one. So the building techniques and the building knowledge and also the building materials are so different from one another. So there is the need of documenting that and learning from which are the learnings that we can get from all those different building types to be used in contemporary architecture. Because an interesting point here is that the idea of passive climate strategies is not something really technological sometimes. It can come from very easy actions that come from having openings or creating spaces that cool up temperatures throughout, for example, the materiality of the roof. A contemporary challenge, I guess, within many countries in Africa currently is the use of corrugated roof sheets and how that creates very high temperatures inside the houses. But if we acknowledge that this is a cheap material that is highly available, that is easy to manufacture and to place on top of the buildings, then what can we do to by using that material, which is really efficient in some terms, we lower up temperatures. So which are the passive strategies that we can take to improve the temperatures inside the building despite the use of certain materials that are useful for the community. So it's a mix of understanding materialities and knowledge on preservation of techniques, but of course the willingness and the funding existing to protect those buildings. I hope this answered your question, Marwa.
It does. Thank you so much. Due to the time constraints, we will only be taking 2 questions from the audience. Does anybody want to ask a question? Say yes.
On the circuitry of the Tonga in Zambia, that advancement, knowledge, and passing of information wasn't necessarily in the so-called Western way of writing, or maybe the Egyptian whatever systems. There are other ways of writing on surfaces that passes information. So in fact, even at the genesis of pottery itself was the genesis of writing techniques that was a means of passing information. Because the marks on pottery wasn't just marks. They meant way more than just an arrow or whatever it was. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Victor, for that. Sorry. Do we have any more questions for the panelists? Please raise your hand. We're done?
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. عمر يوسف جيبوتي وان كايمد اسكي سمف وين كبغي af Soomaaliga aan ku hadlayaa su'aal baan weydiinayaa su'aashaasi ilaa carruurnimadii waa layga sheekeeyey anigu aabbahay zeelab ugu dhashay isagoo 5 jira ayaa Djibouti la geeyey marka waxaa iga sheekayn jiray guryaha in lagu dhisi jiray sonkor maxaa ka runa
To translate, for those of us that don't know Somali, he mentioned that his father was born in Sela, and then the stories that he told around that time was that some of the houses were built using sugar. What are your thoughts on that? Abdul Fattah and Giorgio, this is your time to shine.
Horta waad mahadsan tahay. Markii ugu horreysay interviewskan uu qaadnay qaarkood ay ku jireen in guryaha qaar laga sameeyey sonkor. Marka waa dadkii la wareystay qaarkood way sheegayeen, laakiin si aynu dee scientifically u caddayno waxaynu u baahan nahay inaynu wixii taskaraynaa baynu u baahan nahay. Waxaa kaloo iyaduna muhiim ahayd practice-kan guryaha sokor lagu samaynayo meelo kale ma laga isticmaalaa mise waa arrin saylaacun ku kooban. Haddii ay jirto markaa halkay ka soo gashay saylac bay ka bilaabantay, maxaa loo isticmaalay in sonkorta loo doorto haddii guryaha sokor lagu darayey. Marka aniga qiyaastayda caadiga ah waxay la tahay waxaa la yidhaahdaa waynu ognahay taariikhda saylac ilaa 2000 sano inay ka badan tahay, ilaa Hindiya ilaa maxaa la yidhaahdaa adduunka Mediterranean-ka la odhan jiray saylac inay la ganacsanaysa waynu ognahay. taariikhday ku qoran tahay. Avalatis baa la odhanayay 2000 sano ka hor ayaa kitaabka Birthplace of the Eritrea si taariikhdeeda lagu qoray. Xadaarado kala duwan saylac way la falgelaysay. Magaalo kala socota oo dhaqaale fiican leh inay tahayna waynu caddayn karaynaa. Laakiin ma caddayn karayno. Yes, oral interviewska la dhiibtay dadku way sheegeen in guryaha qaarkood sonkor lagu dhisay laakiin ma caddayn karayno so far scientifically haddaynu rabno inaynu caddayno waxaan ku riixi lahaa jawaabta anoo intaa kaga baxay haddaan doctor jaamac
Giorgio, have you encountered such?
Yes, I was just wondering if you can translate for me in one sentence what Abdi Fattah responded, so I'm not repeating what he said. Thank you.
Giorgio, I said, like in the oral interviews, we had people who mentioned that some of the material that has been used in building some of the houses were used sugar to build some of the houses. Yes, we had that in the oral interview. But to prove it, we need some more scientific investigation regarding the material that has been used for some of the buildings, yes.
Yeah, I'll try to complement that with some further insight. On one side, I confirm what Abdi Fattah says, and this is something that comes up in the interviews in Berbera, I would say at least in 10 interviews. So the idea of using sugar in the construction industry is part of the oral histories of Berbera. It's undeniable. This comes up also in a few interviews in SILAC. From a chemical point of view, sugar can be used in concrete-like constructions, and it works as a retarding agent. So if by any chance you add the sugar to the cement will take longer to harden. So that is something that perhaps in the past was understood, and whenever there was the need for a slower construction, a slower hardening, might have been used. We don't have, as Abdi Fattah said, the technical confirmation of this, but I think on one side, I think what I take advantage for stating is that we don't have to dismiss these local stories as legends. While I was putting together the materials for SILAC for this very conference, I came across one article that dismisses the idea of using sugar as a legend, as something that the locals just made up. I don't think it is as simple as that. And somehow if we fall into the trap of simply saying, okay, that is a legend, there is the risk of further colonizing knowledge. That is what we are trying to avoid. So thank you so much to all the local researchers that help us understand much better and are at the center of these three pieces of research that we have tried to present. Thank you, Abdi Fattah. And thank you, Jama. Fantastic, thank you.
Actually, just for George.
السلام عليكم. nabad idin ahaantiin cabdi fatax bay su-aashayda ku socotaa waxaa jira magaalooyin taariikh ahaan hadda kaba baxayba saaxadda sida magaalada jaaraharato oo wixii iskugu xidhnayd jaaraharato yacni saylac jaaraharato awbare herar kolka ma filaynaa amba wax uun ma idinka soo baxay in saylacna ay ku socoto sida magaalooyinka laga guuraya baaba-ayba taariikh ahaan sida jaaraharato oo kale
bismillahi raxmaan raxiim waad mahadsantahay walaal magaalada jaaraharato waan maqlay waxaa jirta ideo aniga dr jaamac iyo tirsidii aan ka shaqaynayno trade route-ka laftiisa not only inaan la daraasayn tusaale ahaan oo kale magaalada dekedda ama magaalada destinationka ah saylac waxay ka mid ahayd trade route ballaadhan oo dhinac marka laga eegana ku xidhmaya waddadii xariirta ama silk roadka wixii la odhan jiray xaggeena markaa trade route-kaas saylac iyo wuxuu isku xidhi jiray herar maxaa la yidhaahdaa oo markii ay baaba'day dekeddii la odhan jiray adulis oo iminka eritrea ku taalla ayay dekeddeena saylac ay aada u xoogeysatay marka I think research ideyada aad ka fikiraysaa waxay qayb ka noqonaysaa research ideyada guud ee khusaysa in dhammaan trade route-kii saylac to harar in dhammaantii laisku wada daraasadeeyo insha allahna waxaan rajeynaya in ideyada aniga dr jaamac iyaan maskaxda ku haynay oo I think tirsidna ay ka present garaysay Morocco in insha allah haddii alla yidhaha marka la dhamaystiro inay wax ka soo bixi doonaan insha allah haddii alla yidhaha waad mahadsan tahay
anu xagga waxaan ka leeyahay dadkii beriga xilligaa joogdad badan bay haayeenoo maadaama hadday haysteen sonkor ay ku dhistaan guryo xagga sixirbar baa nagu dilay waqtigane first of all I would like to thank ilahay baan soo mahadnaqaya xaggan inoo suurtagelin iskugu nimaadno mar labaad I thank the panelists for taking the time to share something that obviously shows that they've worked hard on. And thirdly, I would like to thank the participants for taking their time and also being a part of this. Thank you so much. This concludes this panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, Marwat, and her panelists. And we immediately move to the next panel, which is bringing research on water management and technological aspects of it. For this panel, I'll call Abraham and Elmi, who is going to be chairing, and the panelists along with him. Thank you very much.
Everyone's ready? Ken, you ready? Are you ready? Yeah. Abdas, you ready? Hi, you ready? Yeah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Before I start, I'm just taking for some comment for the audience. This is more of a scientific conference. But I'm wondering, I'm not seeing any person who's taking a note. I'm actually wondering for this one. What happened? I don't see anyone who's taking up a note or something taken as someone who's actually noted for something. Sorry for that, for the joke. But good afternoon. The director of Hargeysa Cultural Center, Dr. Chama Musa Chama, my colleagues, my dear audience, everyone, good afternoon. And thank you for joining us here in this important panel, which is actually we're talking about some problem that actually is existing here in Somaliland. It's more contextual, and actually it's more practical, or something that's really happening this right time here. So our panel started about the water management by digital technology and also research-based conservations. My name is Abdurrahman Elmi. I'm the biology teacher as well as the head of learning support department in Farah Secondary School in Sheikh. So I'm really honored and really happy to moderate this kind of discussion. And we know in the last 10 years in our country or whole of Africa, actually we suffer about a lot problem more related about the droughts and concurrent water scarcity. And access to water, it's not just only for matter of survival, but it's a matter of equity, sustainability, and also the innovation. So this panel we bring together a different or various experts about this field, which actually will tell us about their insight and their research, and they share with us how do they solve the problem. Although the problem is not actually solved for some regions in Somaliland, but they do their best, so they will share with their insights in here in this panel. So we will begin the 3 speakers. Each one we will give them into 10 minutes to present their research and the insight, how do they find out and how do they solve the problems and the research that they have done it here. And lastly, we will give into the last 5 minutes or 10 minutes, we will give them to the floor to ask their reflection and also the questions that they have for them. So allow me to introduce to you the panelists. Let me start with Kim. Kim Lee is a Chief Research and Evaluation Officer in the Farah Foundation. He's basically his expertise in development and environmental economic, and he holds a PhD in economics from UC Berkeley University, and also he is a former award winner instructor in UC Berkeley Hargeysa School of Business. And also he published different research which they are cited by the biggest journal in a political economy. Also, he led an Air Equality Life Index in EPIC, India, in the University of Chicago. Also, he conducted a major research in the rural electricity in Africa. Also, he is a former analyst in the Morgan Stanley, London. Kim, he published a lot of research, and his researches were published into the prominent journals, and also they were cited by the biggest media like a BBC and Reuters and the Forbes as well. So welcome, Kim. Welcome to Somaliland, the land of peace and the prosperity as well. Allow me also to introduce to you Abdulaziz Ali Ahmed. He is the head of research and the evaluation of Farah Foundation in Somaliland, and also his expertise in research and the program evaluation. And he has been working for this one in the last 12 years, more than 12 years. And his previous roles is majorly related about the meal, and he has served in a meal advisory in development fund in Norway. Also, he served as a meal coordinator in Concern Worldwide Organization. Also, he is very tough as his achievement. He has a double patch, which is a public administration and the statistics and mathematics. Also, he is a master of international cooperation and humanitarian aid. Also, he graduated, and also he had a master of research and data analysis in Amir University. He's not only for working for the organization, but also he's a teacher, and let me say to another way, into lecture, and which is the noble work what we do back in the schools or the universities. So he's a lecturer in research methodology at the University of Hargeysa as well. So he presented at different conferences about he published in different research, and then he presented with the different places like Kenya, Tanzania, as well as into Norway. So welcome, Abdelaziz. And lastly, let me introduce to you to Mona Abdullah Ahmed. She's the head of Center of the Ground State Water Management in Hargeysa Water Agents. Also, her key projects that she contributed or she take a part of it, like Kalkore Dam project, subsurface dam development, power hole monitoring, and the water resource management. Mona, she's a very expertise in environmental health, water security, and sustainability, and drought resilience. Lastly, her education, she has a master's degree in sustainability development, sustainability leadership from Arizona State University. So welcome, Mona. Now I'm giving to the stage to Kim to present his research about the water management through biotechnology and also conservations. So please welcome to Kim.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. So it's great to be back on stage. This morning we spoke about education, which really remains at the heart of what Faro Foundation does. And I'm really excited because we're talking about water now, which is another one of our core mission pillars. So Abdelaziz and I are going to do a little bit of a back and forth again, and we're going to try to cover three things. So first, we'll just describe for you what Faro Foundation is doing to build water resilience in rural parts of this country. And then second, we'll cover two digital tools that we've been developing, and I don't think we've actually presented them in public before, so this is really the first time. The first one is an AI-powered computer vision system that tracks usage of our rainwater harvesting infrastructure that we've built. So Abdelaziz is going to describe that one. And then the second thing is a satellite-derived analytics effort that we're using to locate, track, and evaluate the performance of heifer dams and rainwater harvesting dams across the country, which I'll describe. So just to frame this a little bit first, everyone in this room, I think, is very well aware of the worsening drought crisis across the Horn of Africa. As someone who only started working in this country a few years ago, I would always see articles like this in the New York Times about how climate change is making the likelihood and the severity of drought much worse, and that presents a very big risk to some of the most traditional economic activities like pastoralism. Now, when we looked at the data, if you could see this, we looked at rainfall data from the country. So this is rainfall data from 2005 until 2024, and these are days of the year. So where you see a little bit of blue, that's where it's raining a lot, right? So if you go back like 20 years, there were sort of like two rainy seasons that were pretty well defined. There was the Gru season and the Dare season, right? But over time, that second rainy season is starting to disappear. It's just not being captured at the rainfall gauge stations anymore. And so what we've seen is things like the 2019 to 2022 period, dramatic decline in rainfall, culminating in the 2022 drought. And when you look at the data, over the past 20 years, annual rainfall has declined by 18%, and the number of rainy days has fallen by about 46%. So in response to these trends, Faro Foundation has been building a portfolio of heifer dams, ranging in size from 18,000 to 15,000 cubic meters, to capture and store rainwater for public access in rural communities. So I'll now hand it over to Abdelaziz, who will share more about our portfolio of infrastructure and what we're learning.
All right, thank you, Ken, about that. Waxaan malin doonaa roomka waxa isugu soo hadhay unin Somaliland disk marka laga reebo hal qof markaas si fariintu aan idin soo gaarsiin karo waxaan ku hadli doonaa haddii la ka dhigo luqadeena af Soomaaliya is wareejiga ninkaan oo suuranay wahagaag mashruuca biyaha Faro waxa uu ka shaqeeyaa sida uu kan sheegay heifer damska marka waxaan aragnay xafeer dhaamisku ama dhaamunka weyn inuu naqaano xafeer dhaamisku ina ay wadamada cimiladoodu sida Soomaaliland tahay saxara ama saxara lamoodka ay ku habboon yihiin marka ilaa maanta waxaan dhisnay 7 dhaam oo ay capacity-ga ama biyaha ay qaadi karaan ama ay kaydin karaan ay u dhaxayso 17,000 cubic meter ilaa 67,000 cubic meter waxaana ku yaalaan 3 gobol hadda gobolka Maroodijeex saaxil iyo maxaa la yiraahdaa burco haddii tusaalahaan aad waxa laga yaabaa dee kulley dadka yaryar iminka magaalada ku dhashay mooyaane badi waxa laga yaabaa miyi weyn wada tagnay xoolo weyn wada aroorinay dhaamo wada aragteen laakiin haddii aad isweydiisaan xafeer dhaamisku muxuu kaga duwan yahay dhaamanka naqaanay sawirkoodu waa kaa marka faara qaabka u dhistaana waa ka duwan yahay dhaamanka badi sida waddanka looga dhiso oo sawirkastaan structurekiisu waxa weyn waa regular shape bacdi baa taala waxaa loo sameynayaa dhammaan facilitieski ama kaabayaashii ama kaalimihii dadka ahaadaan ama kuwii xoolaha ahaadaan laga cabi lahaa sidoo kale waxaa loo sameynayaa filterkii biyaha kaan hagaajinayay si dadka caafimaadkooda aanay waxba yeelin maadaama biyahanu qabanay yihiin biyaha hawada dhulka dusheeda waxa weeye waa dhaamkanu arkaynay oo roobkii daayay oo ay biyihii ku jiraan waxa weeye dhaamkii laga faa'iidaysanayo oo dadkii ay ka cabayaan xoolahay ka cabayaan kaalimihiisaynu sheeginay iyo dararkii ay xooluhu ay ka cabayeen markaa waa tusaalayaal ka mid ah ama sawirro ka mid ah dhaamankaan dhisnay sidaa u eg yihiin iyo nooca yihiin Now I would like to hand over to Ken before I start this session so that he can talk about a little bit the background that the commuter vision idea came and where we are now today.
Great, thank you. So when we first created our internal research and evaluation team at Farah Foundation in 2022, one of the first questions our donors asked was, okay, so we're building these dams, they're very big, very expensive. How much water are they actually delivering to people and animals? And that's like a fair and important question because part of what's going to make the construction of these types of dams sustainable is if we could actually prove to donors and to governments how much they're benefiting communities, and if we could create that credible, quantifiable evidence of impact. So in response, we started out by trying to measure and count how many people were coming into these dams. We set up a team to sit there and count the number of animals and goats and camels and cattle, the people, and we were finding out that, in fact, indeed, many people were coming through and taking a lot of water. But it wasn't very sustainable, right, or transparent or even that credible because it's really just based on human records. So in response, we've been developing and deploying digital tools to help us measure dam usage more rigorously. And what we developed, which Abdiaziz will describe, is a solar-powered AI computer vision system, which we've dubbed the Camel Cam, that actually counts the number of people and animals coming through. And potentially in the future, we'll be able to generate digital receipts of actual impact of these water investments. So I'll give it back to Abdiaziz.
Thank you, Ken. وهجاج سida uu Ken yar taabtay dhaamkii uu horreeyay markaan dhisnay waxaan u baahanay dheeto in dhaamkaan ka helo marka hadii jeer isticmaalka biyaha marka dheeto laga ururinayo way ka duwan tahay marka mashaariicda kale laga ururinayo waxa laga yaabaa dheetada hal qoys oo deegaanka degan inuu maalinkii uu booqan karo ama uu dhaam ka faa'iideysan karo in ka badan 10 jeer marka waxaan u baahanahay 10 ka jeer oo qoysku yimid waxa laga yaabaa xaajida ariga keenaysa mid odayga geela keenaya mar caruurta maqasho keenaysa mar dhaamka soo raraysa in usage-ka aynu arki karno waa sidee dhaam isticmaalka dhaamku dad intee leeg baa imanaya imse jeer bay imanayaan halkeebay ka kala imanayaan marka dhaamkii koobaad waxaanu samaynay inan baanu qaadanay dhaamkuu degay halkaasuu deganaa sanad iyo 2 bilood habeenkii dacwadii waraabu dhegeysanay cidooda maalinkiina xogta ayuu qaadayay waxaa dhici doonta soo arki doontaan xilliyada jiilaalkii waxa laga yaabaa in 150 qoys ay mar kale yimaadaan xoolihii iyo loo iyo geeli wata marka qofku inuu qoraa aad buu adag tahay waa qori karaa inankaas si wacan buu shaqeeyo qoray laakiin qaladaadkii bilaadanka ayaa aad u badnaanaya sidoo kale fikirkaasi markaynu eegina aqoonta aynu baranay wax sidoo kale ay noqonaysaa inaynaan qofkii capacity-giisii aynaan ka wada faa'iidaysan oo aynu u baahan nahay xalal kale oo ka jaban dhaam kasta loo heli karo aqoon xogta lagaga qaado lana fidin karo kabacdi waxaanu keennay waxay midee fikirka inaynu kamarado aynu ku xidhno inaka oo ay kamaradaasi solar ku shaqaynayaan habeenkii maalintiiba ay shaqaynayaan kamaradii waxaan ugu talagalay inay tiriso dadka imanaya iyo xoolaha imanaya iyo frequency-ga intee leg bay imanayaan marka halkaas waa anaga ku tababaraynaa kamaradu modelkii waa anaga ku tababaraynaa inay garan karto kan waa qof biniaadana kan waa ri waa ari waa geel maxaa la idhahdaa anagu taa ku tababarayna waa jirikaan marka waxa weeye tababarkii oo socda kamaradii waa human waa jirikaan waa maxay waa dameer waa awr waa saas oo kale yes yes halkaas waxa weeye markaan ku tababaraynay modelka inuu akhriyi karo tusaale ahaan imise neef baa yimiday ma ariba ma lo-ba maxaa la idhahdaa ma geelba ma aqoonsan kartaa tusaale ahaan inuu haddii hal neef soo galo inaanad laba jeer noo tirin oo odhan karto tusaale ahaan waa neefkii un oo hal mar uu tirin karo ma aqoonsan kartaa oo markaa halkan ku tababarina hadduu qof yimaado intaa uu joogo premiseska dhaamka inaanu maxaa la idhaahdaa hal mar uu tirin karo oo aan laba jeer la tirin halkaa graafka ad arkaysaa wuxuu sheegayaa modelka markaan tababaraynay waxaad u baahan tahay modelku shaqada kuu qabanaya inay noqoto mid ka wanaagsan tii qofka biniaadan kuu qabanayo oo aynu ka saarno qaladaadka dhan meesha marka halka waxaynu ku tababaraynay in saxitaankiisa inaanu maxaa la dhahdaa intellig accuracy-giisa inaan kor soo qaadan improve karayno oo dheetooyinkii uriyeen ka badan saad arkaysaan 100 g b 70% baa lagu tababaray inta kalena waa lagu xaqiijiyey si xogta uu soo saaray ay noqoto mid la isku halayn karo lana isticmaali karo marka waxa weyn sidaan u hagaajinay ama aan u eegnay intellig modelku wayna siinaya maxaa la dhahdaa sax xog sax waxa weeye modelkeenu tababarnay oo hadda shaqadii qabanaya tusaale ahaan qof baa soo gelaya amaba waxaa soo gelaya xoolo ka cabaya intaa uu qofkaasi ama neefkaasi uu joogo 360ka ay kamaradu ay qabanayso ama xayndaabka dhaamka modelku uu la soconaya tusaale ahaan neefka boxeska aad aragtaan waxa weeye inuu daba socdaa markuu neefka halka soo istaago wuu qabanayaa wuu dhaqaaqay wuu raacayaa ilaa intaa uu xayndaabka ku jiro wuu daba soconaya wuu ilaalinaya haddii xataa 100 ay soo galaan haddii ay 500 soo galaan wuu daba socdaa by the time uu ka baxa premiseska ayuu sii deynaya sababta uu sameeyay waxa weeyaan halkii accuracy-gu soo noqonaysa waxa weeyaan inaanu hal neef laba jeer aanu ku tirin sidoo kale inaanu ku dawaqin marka xoolo badan soo galaan way jiilaalkii kala saarki doontaan waxa laga yaabaa in hal maalin 100 qoys hal mar ay saacad soo arooraan oo mid kastaaba tiro ariya intaas soo geela intaas soo la wato haddii tusaalahaan haddaba iminka xogtii markii uu modelku inoo ururiyey waxaynu ku samaynay sida la filayo inaynu analysis ku samayno aynu eegno xogta aynu qabanay sidee bay u eg tahay sanadkiina haddaad eegto waxaynu marnaa xilliyo kala duwan waxaynu marnaa jiilaal iyo gugi marka waxaanu aragnay oo aanu baranay tusaale ahaan dhaamanku markuu roobku doo ay dhaamka biyo galaan xilliga dhaamku ugu isticmaalka badan yahay waxa weeye bisha xilliyada jiilaalkii markaanu kasoo bilowno bisha maxaa la dhahdaa 11aad buu isticmaalku bilaabmaya laakiin wuxuu xoogeysanayaa 12aad ilaa January ilaa March marka haddii aad aragtaan curve-ka waxaynu sanaa 3 shay greenku wuxuu inoo sheegayaa ama akhtarku roobkii bluegu wuxuu inoo sheegayaa dadkii ciddii isticmaalaysa dhaamka ama visitorskii maxaa la dhahdaa maxaa light greenkaas wuxuu inoo sheegayaan water levelka ayuu inoo sheegaya marka iminka January ilaa March markaad eegtaan dadka soo booqanaya ama isticmaalku aad buu u sarreeya roobkii baa bilaabmay saad greenka u arkaysaan marka la gaadhay April ilaa June July isticmaalka hoos buu dhacay waayo meel roob baa daay dhaam kasta meel yaro kasta biyaa ku jira qoyska bacdii biyaa ku jira dhaamkii yaraa biyaa ku jira kabacdi marka uu gugi tago aynu xilligan kala soo gaarno July ama August waxa dib u bilaabmaya in isticmaalkii bato saad arkaysaan tusaale ahaan laymamka faraha badan leh waxay sheegayaan traafigii sidee buu dhaamku traafigi yahay dad iyo xoolaba sidee loo imanay isticmaalkii baa maxaa la dhahdaa dib u bilaabmay marka laga bilaabo July ilaa January marka waxa weyn xogtaas waa xogtiina siiyey ay kamaraduna siisay waxay noo sheegaysaa sida iyo xilliyada ugu xoog weyn leh ee la isticmaalo dhaamka markaad eegtaan 3 bilood oo horeeya sanadka iyo inta u dambaysa waa markuu isticmaalku ugu faraha badan yahay markaasoo kale haddii aanad haysan teknolojiyadan ama aqoontan qofkii biniaadanka ma tirin karo uu ku dawaqaya way adkaanaysaa inuu ku siiyo xog sax sidoo kale tir waxay noo sheegaysaa si aynu cabirnay tusaale ahaan maxaa la dhahdaa dadkii soo booqanayay dhaamka ka faa'iidaysanayay xoolihii iyo maxaa dhaa iyo imse jirikaan ayay dadku dhaansadeen waa markaa waa mid ka mid ah waa dhaamamkii hore waxaynu eegnay hal dhaamo waddo makaayil kani waa dhaam labaad oo la yidhaahdo ilinta markaas waa the same waa sidii oo kale markaynu eegina tusaale ahaan akhtarku wuxuu noo sheegayaa roobkii daayey tusaalehaan roobkiinu wuxuu daaya sidaad ogtihiin abril marka la gaadho xilliyada guga aynu naqaano buluga wuxuu noo sheegayaa dadkii soo booqanayey iyo maxaa idhahdaa heerkii biyaha markaa saddex shey baan cabirnaa waxaan cabirnaa isticmaalka dhaamka dad iyo xoolaba sida u imanayaan xilliyada kala duwan waxaa kaloona cabirnaa roobka da-aya si aanu la socon karano roob inteelig baa ka da-a aan ugu go-aan qaadan karno dhaamka mustaqbalka dhisi doono iyo meesha roobkeedu siduu yahay iyo maxaa la idhahdaa biyuhu halkee bay gaadhaan kabaasigii dhaamka miyay buuxsameen iyo markaynu eegina isticmaalka iyo dadku inta isticmaaleen water levelku siduu iskula bedbedelayo yes marka now I would like to hand over to the microphone to Ken so that we can proceed with the other sessions.
Okay, thank you, Abdulaziz. Okay, so that was a fun project. We now are not only digging rainwater harvesting dams, but we have eyes on the ground that is telling us how much our infrastructure is being used. And it was quite funny to do as a project because, we would joke out in the field about just the amount of technology that we're combining, right? From computer vision, AI, GPRS, solar, all of this stuff to essentially count goats. So, probably centuries of human effort came together to count goats automatically, remotely, and that was kind of fun. But at Farrow Foundation, our mission is actually to find a solution to water scarcity in this country. And obviously, building a few dams and building some systems like this is not going to do the trick. So we started to think about what more can we do? How do we build an evidence base to attract more and more investment and interest in building climate adaptation and resilience infrastructure? And as we scaled our dam portfolio, we kept asking, is this the right thing to do, like building dams? Where is actually the greatest need? And what do we actually know about the current state of built infrastructure in the country? Because to make smart, forward-looking investments to solve the problem of water scarcity, we need to not only understand how much capacity exists today in terms of water capture potential, but also how much demand for water will there be in the future, and then how do you fill that gap? So to do that, we've been launching two parallel research tracks. So one is a series of surveys we've been conducting in communities at these dam sites to understand how people are using the dams and what is making them work, what's making them fail. And then another effort, which is from space, where we're looking at satellite images from Google Earth, right? Those types of images, and machine learning to try to automatically locate dams and measure how they're performing. So here's one of our dams. This is Watamaka Hill, right? And here is the Google Maps image of Watamaka Hill, the same place. What we essentially did is we downloaded about 350,000 satellite images, and we worked with our collaborators at the University of Massachusetts Amherst to analyze these images and detect surface water bodies, so that's just surface water sources, to measure how those water sources, those water bodies are changing over time, to then estimate the total storage capacity in the country, right? And it's still a work in progress, but I'll show you some of the things that we found so far. Okay, so maybe like 3 insights, okay? So the first thing that we found is that there are way more dams than we actually initially thought. So our baseline data set was from the FAO Swallem database, in which there was about 241 listed heifer dams in Somaliland. When we use satellite images to look for surface water across the country, we actually found more than 1,000 heifer dams, right? And actually when we map all of the bodies of water that we find, they actually fall neatly into 2 distributions. So the distribution on the left are small. So actually the x-axis is the size of the shape area. So it's the surface area meter square. So all of the water bodies that we found that map into the left distribution are brookheads. small private water storage and private properties, and then the ones on the right are the heifer dams. And the darker shaded distributions inside those distributions are the FAO dams in the FAO data set, and the bigger distributions are actually what we found from satellite images. So there's a lot more water capture infrastructure than we or even the government initially thought, which was surprising. However, many of these dams are in various states of disrepair. Sometimes they're functioning well, sometimes they're not. So the neat thing that you can do when you analyze satellite images is you can look for something called a normalized difference water index, NDWI. And what that does is it compares how different surfaces reflect green and near infrared light to detect surface water. So when we look at that index over time at the same locations, we can actually see the amount of water changing as it rains, and then as it gets dry and it gets used up. And so not all of these dams are working properly. And then from our field surveys, actually this is an image of a dam, and you see on the right, you sort of see the exact same dam and how it's capturing water at different months of the year. Where it's darker means there's more water covering the surface of the dam. And so for all of the dams in the country, we have a panel series, maybe every couple weeks, of how much water has been captured and held and how quickly it's declining, across these thousands of sites in the country, right? So, right. So the second thing that we document, and this one really comes from our surveys, is that 1 in 4 dams have failed. Roughly 22% of the dams we surveyed were non-functional. They were either dry, breached, or abandoned, but we believe that the real number could be as high as 40%. So that's actually a lot of infrastructure, potential infrastructure, that is sitting in the field, right? A lot of work went into digging the dams. They're probably in good locations, but they're not working properly, and I think that presents an opportunity. Now the third sort of pattern that we've been looking at is that the design of a heifer dam actually matters a lot. So this is a comparison of 2 dams that are actually just a few kilometers away from each other near Biofadisinka. The top one was actually a dam that was rehabilitated by GIZ in 2019, and importantly, they included a geomembrane liner, so kind of like a rubbery liner to prevent seepage. And the bottom one is a dam that is roughly the same size that didn't have the geomembrane liner. And what you see on the charts on the right are that the blue lines are rain events. When it rained, the top dam actually captured a lot of water and held it for a while, whereas the dam on the bottom, it rained and filled up but just immediately lost all the water as it seeped out. So the way that we actually design these dams, or the kinds of feature characteristics that we add to them, matter a great deal in terms of how long they could hold water. Okay, so the final thing I show you, which we're really working on, is a panel chart, like over time, of aggregate water capture capacity in the country and how much water is being captured when it rains. So what does this all mean? So I think in our research, we find that Somaliland actually has a lot more water storage than we thought or the government thought, but much of it is underperforming due to poor maintenance or governance. And this is actually a huge opportunity, because if our goal is to increase the total rainwater capture potential across the country, then we can maybe leverage data by rehabilitating and optimizing existing dams, targeting places with high catchment potential, and then using tools like the Camel Cam or tracking NDWI using satellite images to make sure we understand which dams are performing and which are not. And so, yeah, I think that's really the summary of our research, and I'll pass it to Muna now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kim, for your contribution and also the very good insight for your research. And thank you, Abdulaziz, as well. Waqtiga inagu yar idinkoo raaliya. Waxaan u wareegi doonaa hadda intaan u wareegin wakaaladda muna oo ka socota wakaaladda biyaha ee Hargeysa. Waxaan rabaa inaan hal su'aal ku daro inkastoo waqtiga uu iska kooban yahay. Su-aashu waxay tahay waxaan weydiin lahaa Abdulaziz Hoverdamiska markii la dhisayay waxaa researchka inooga muuqday in gobollo gooniya mostly laga dhisay ama laga hirgeliyey iyadoo ay jiraan goobo badan oo iyaguna uga muxuu ahaa baahi badan ama ay jiraan dhibaatooyin badan oo xagga biyaha ay ka taagan yihiin. Marka su-aashu waxay tahay markaad dooranayseen inaad Hoverdamiska dhistaan ma waxaad eegteen baahida ma dhawaanshaha ma muxuu ahaa managementiga sidee u doorateen maadaama ay jiraan meelo badan oo iyaguna uga baahi badan in laga dhiso waxa weeyaan Hoverdamiska? Mahadsanid.
Okay, waa su-aal fiican aadna u ballaaran kolley injineerkii biyuuna uu joogaa wixii aan ka jawaabi kari waa isaga caawin doona injineer maxamuud. waxaa jira laba marxaladood buu soo maray mashruuca biyuhu amaba dhaamamku shaqadoodu. markii hore bilowgii waxaynu eegaynay annagoo dowladda la tashanayna baahida ugu badan xagee ka jirtaa, halkee xoolo joogaan, halkee tusaale ahaan xataa markaa maadaama shaqada cusbeyd la gaari karaa xaggii accesskii baanu eegaynay. markii aanu saa ku bilownay markii dambe waxaan nidhi waxaan u baahannahay strategy tan ka ballaaran oo ay maxaa la dhahdaa aqoontuna ay hegayso. marka meelaha waxyaabaha ugu waaweyn marka laga tago prioritiska dowladdu u yaalla, marka laga tago tusaale ahaan waxaanu eegnaa xoolaha ugu badan xaggay joogaan, baahida ugu badan xagee ka jirtaa, guuritaanka dadka ugu badan xagee ka guuraan. sidoo kale waxaan eegnaa tusaale ahaan halkeebaa dhaam ku habboon. communityga laftarkeega dhaamka loo dhisi doono waxaan doonaa markii faare dhisto inay communitygaasi ay la wareegaan gacanta ku hayaan oo dhaamka sii socdo oo aanay faare weligeed u taagnaan. communityyadu siday u kala duwan yihiin oo ay diyaar ugu yihiin maxaa la dhahdaa inay la wareegaan hawsha mustaqbalka sii wadaan. marka imika saynu arkayno Somaliland 6 gobol 50% ayaa iminkan ka fargaranay 3 gobol bay shaqadani maxaa la dhahdaa ay ka dhacday. laakiin imika waxa strategy biyaha cusub waxaanu dhiitaa hagi doona. marka tusaale waxay qof kasta waxa u cadaan doontaa sababta tuule X ama gobol X dhaam looga sameeyey isagoo maxaa la dhahdaa aan su-aashayn badan ka fikirin. marka haddii aan wax ka tegey injineerkii biyuhuna maadaama anu xag research ka socdo waa uu joogaa. marka injineerku haddii aan injineer wax ka tegey qodob muhiim ah aanan xusin waad ku dari doontaa insha allah.
wuu mahadsan yahay walaalkii Cabdulaziz. waxaan hadda u wareegi doonaa wakaaladda biyaha ee Hargeysa. soo dhaweymana waxaan doonaya inaan ku weydiiyo ood nooga warinto ama nooga warbixiso wakaaladda biyaha ee Hargeysa qaabkay u shaqeyso, qaabka waxa weeyaan isbedelka ku yimiday iyo waxqabadadii aad gaadheen waqtiyadan dambe. mahadsanid.
waad mahadsantahay walaal. horta af Soomaali baan ku hadli doonaa. runtii waxqabadka wakaaladda hadda kama hadlayo, laakiin marka la eego topican waxyaabihii aynu qabanay markay noqoto water management iyo qaabka aynu digital transformation ama digital technology aynu ula jaan qaadano, labada arrin ayaan highlight gareyn doonaa. first of all horta qoladan Faro Foundation wada shaqayn xoogan baa inaga dhaxaysay, halka dhaamamkana hadda annagu waanu ku dheereynaa alxamdulilah. marka maadaama aynu annagu nahay dowladdii ama government institution maadaama aanu nahay, waxaan doonayaa horta inaan caddeeyo in aynu aragti ka duwan aragtidii hore inaynu la nimid. marka muhiimaddu ma aha inaynu only supply gareyno Hargeysa ama inaynu biyaha soo garaacno. muhiimad waxaan u wareegnay in aynu eegno sidaynu biyaha u joogteyn karno, sidaynu uga faa'iideysan karno natural resourceska annagoo biyaha ama biyaha roobka aynu yacni kaydsanayno. marka waxaanu u wareegnay qaabka ama directionka la dhaho sustainability, water sustainability markay tahay annagoo doonayna inaan biyaha kaydka hoose inaynu badbaadino, waayo waan wada ognahay biyahaas in uu biyo dhammaanaya inuu yahay, anagoo doonayna in mataqaanaa aan nimcadda ilaahayna siiyo roobabka aynu ka faa'iidaysano dhaamamkana xidhanno horta ilaahay baa mahadle dhowr bilood ka hor waxaynu dhammaystirnay dhaamka ugu weyn Somaliland waxaa la dhahaa Kalqoray Dam marka dhaamkaas maaha dhaamamka yaryar waa dhaam aad u weyn kulley qaarkiin waxay ku arkeen social media inta badanna hadda haddii aad tagtaan waxaad arkaysaan in dee Hargeysa bad yeelatay waliba waqooyiga ku yaala markii hore waxaa lagu dacayeyn jiray Gabile inay bad yeelatay hadda annaga bad yeelanay alxamdulillah marka dhaamkaas qaadkiisu waxa weeyaan 1.6 million cubic meters biyahaas anagu waxaan ugu talagalnay in inuu ceelasha inuu waraabiyo waayo markaad wax ka qaadatid ceelasha aanad waxba ku celin kolley way dhurayaan marka la eego magaaladana siday u fiday marka waa in dee laga taxaduraa taana in lala yimaado dee qaab loo badbaadin karo marka ilaahay baa mahadle in dhaamkeenii noogu horeeyay Irvin dhaamka inuu guuleystay maantana alxamdulillah roobkuna ku da'ay haddaad tagtaanna dhaamkaas uu buuxsamay sidoo kale hore waxaanu bilownay annagoo eegayna awoodeenna oo isku dayayna expertise-keenna dhaam biyo hoosaada ayaanu dhisnay la dhaho darayga subsurface dam baa la dhahaa sidoo kale waxaynu wada shaqeynay Faro Foundation ayagoo dhisay dam dhanka ceelashana ku yaala oo asaguna yahay subsurface dam marka labada subsurface dam waxaa ku socda monitoring annagoo eegayna intee in la eg bay ceelasha ku agyaala ay ku munaafacadsadeen horta Faro Foundation waan uga hambalyeynaya anigu horumarka ay gaadheen dhanka researchka waayo mar walba dee wax baad ka baranaysaa cidda horumar ka gaadhay dhankaas mataqaanaa teknolojiyada ee isku fiildna aad tihiin hadda marka taana waa wax aynu ka baran doono insha Allah aynu ka wada shaqeyn doono markaan ka imaado dhanka dhaamamka waxaan jecelahay inaan yara highlight gareeyo dhanka digitalization-ka kolley wakaaladda dadka uu biyuhu soo gaadho way ogaayeen dhibta ka timaada dadku markay lacagta bixinayaan ay noqoto waliba inay berigii horean ka hadlaya in cash laga dhigo in meesha lagu bixiyo in dhibtaasi cid walba dee ay qabsato hadda dadka dee wakaaladda biyaheeda cabo way garanayaan adoo gurigaaga jooga ayaad lacagta bixin kartaa adoo koodka gelinaya marka waxaynu u wareegnay digital transformation waxaynu ogaanay dee maadaama uu macmiilku dhib uu ku qabo waxyaabaha qaarkood inaynu u fudaydino customer managementka inaynu annagu hore ugu soconno sidoo kale cabashooyinka fara badanna inaynu u sameyno maarayn inaynu u sameyno sidoo kale waxaynu asaasnay projectyo kala duwan iyo systemyo kala duwan GIS-ku aad garanaysaan geographical information system ayaanu u asaasnay wakaaladda gaarna u leh wakaaladuna gaar u leh aanay cidi consultant aanay cidi gacanta aanay yacni gaar u hayno oo naga kiraynayn ay wakaaladdu gaar u leedahay oo ay tahay in lagu kaydiyo assetska wakaaladda dhammaanteed sidoo kale in lagala socdo wixii baybiyo markii hore waxay ahaan jirtay sida in ay shaqaalaha farsamayaqaanka ay sahamin jireen qaarkood ciddii halkaa shaqo kule odhan jirtay halkaasuu bayb ku hoos jira marka hadda wixiiba system buu noogu jiraa wixii dhulka hoostiisa halkaa ku yaala markiiba waa la ogaanaya waayo systemka laga soo dhex saaraya hawl yarna may ahayn hawl adag bay ahayd laakiin ilaahay baa nagu guuleeyay alxamdulillah in aynu maanta aynu assetkeena baybiyadeena iyo kaagageena xataa meel ay ku yaaliin aynu wada ognahay alxamdulillah systemka marka la eego sidoo kale waxaynu sameynay saacadaha cusub kolley waad maqasheen saacadaha cusub waxay fudaydinayaan in customerka ama macmiilka inaan la khaldin inta badan lacagtiisa sidoo kale inaanu qofka lacagta soo qoraya inaanu dee iska odhan intaasay soo qortay ee tirada saxda in lagala socdo. sidoo kale ballaadhin baa ku socota projectkaas in annagoo wakaaladda joogna in lanoo soo qoro aynu ogaano xaafad kasta biyaha intay cabtay sidaynu aynu annagu dhankeena xataa aynu usoo kordhino collection efficiency-ga. sidoo kale kolley waad aragteen call center ayaynu yeelanay, hotline baynu leenahay. haddaad garaacdaan numberkaas 932 waad helaysaan wakaaladda. oo sidoo kale wixii cabasho ah iyo wixii mataqaanaa recommendation ah wixii aad looga baahan yahay halkaasaa looga heli karaa. marka intaa iyo inka badan horta waxaa jirta projectyo kala duwan iyo programmo kala duwan jira, laakiin waxaan doonayaa inaan muujiyo inaynu annagu u wareegnay qaab digital ah, inaynu annagu u wareegayno from wixii manualka, wixii la qorqorayay, wixii mataqaanaa loo imaanayay, inaynu annagu dhankeenna aynu ku dadaalanayno macaamiisha inaynu fudaydino shaqadooda, annagana serviceka inaynu fudaydino iyo monitoringka annaga xataa shaqadeena. marka intaasaan anigu kusoo koobaya.
mahadsanidid Muna, aad baad u mahadsan tahay waxqabadkeena iyo waxqabadka dowladdaba, aad baad u mahadsan tahay. waxaan rajaynayaa inay intaasi kasii ballaadhato. waxaan rabaa intaanan usoo gudbin dhowrka su-aalood ee aan siin doono dhegeystayaasha ama kasoo qaybgalayaasha, waxaan rabaa inaan su-aal weydiiyo halkani. degan ahaan ma degani anigu Hargeysa oo si fiican uma kala aqaano, laakiin kolley waxaan filayaa inaan deganahay meel ku dhow santarka magaalada. wakaaladda biyuhuna kolley tola anigu waxaan ka warrami doonaa cabashadayda. kolley waxaan imaadaa inta fasaxa ah waqtigaan joogaa. waxaad sheegteen dhammaantood digital in bibiskii wixii dhan la hagaajay, haddana dhibkan haystaayo had iyo jeer waxa weeyaan caqabadda ugu badan haysataa guri markaan degno waxa weeyaan waa muxuu ahaa waa biyaha. marka mashruucu waxa weeyaan waxaan maqli jiray kolley mashruuc la yidhaahdo faanoole. marka goormuu bal waxa weeyaan insha allah bal dhammaan biyuhu gaadhi doonaan Hargeysa oo dhan insha allah, mise goormaad ugu talagashay inuu gaadho biyuhu waxa weeyaan dhammaan Hargeysa qaybihi ay kala dhan?
horta cabashadaadu wakaaladda toos baad ugu imaan kartaa ama nambarkaad garaaci kartaa laakiin su-aasha markaan u imaado xilli may Hargeysa biyo wada helaysaa, horta su-aashaas waa su-aal aada u weyn. ilaahay baa runta jecel, sababtoo ah magaaladani isma oga, way fidaysaa way sii kordhaysaa. guryihii waxaa lagu dhisayaa 2 bilood 3 bilood, xaafado dhan baa soo kacaya wax sanad ka yar, marka magaaladii way fidaysaa. haddaan ka hadlo hadda yacni mashaariicda aan gacanta ku hayno ay ka mid tahay annagoo inaan gaarsiino xaafadaha kala duwan biyaha, waxaa ka mid ah qaybta labaad ama wejiga labaad ee biyaha, mashruucan la dhaho water supply and basic sanitation project. mashruucan wuxuu soo socday muddo dheer buu hadda soo socday, laakiin alxamdulillah hadda gabagabo ayuu marayaa, waaban dhammaystirnay. haddii aan dhaho Hargeysa taas ilaahay baa og xilli ay biyo wada helayso haye, laakiin annagu mar walba dadaal waxaan ugu jirnaa in aynu gaarsiino dhankaanu gaarsiin karno. for example hadda mashruucan soo dhammaystirmaya wuxuu gaarsiinayaa baybiyadu waxay yihiin 162 kilomitir oo pipes. waad fahmi kartaan, waad yacni imagine garayn kartaan, waad sawiran kartaan intay la eg yihiin 162 kilomitir oo pipes ah. marka la isku daro dee mataqaanaa crossingka ilaa xaafadaha. marka taasina waxay ahayd mashruucu naga taageeray jarmalku haye, oo intaa ilaa adigu sanadadii u dambeysay 5 sano u dambeysay uu socday mashruucaas. dhanka wakaaladda annagu waanu dadaalaynaa. dadaalkan waxaan ku muujinayaa in mashruuca laftarkiisa uu 2 jeer ayaa contractorka aynu ka erinay annagoo wakaaladiya. contractorka ama shirkadda qandaraaska haysay midna jarmal bay ahayd oo shaqadii may dhammaystirin,
tii dambena waxay noqotay Chinese shaqadii may dhamaystirin marka percentage laga gaadhay annagoo wakaaladii ah oo muujinayna inaynu mashaariic kala duwan hore u qabanay annaga nidhi waanu dhammaynaynaa maxaa hadhay mashruuca inta hadhsan 5 bilood ma ku dhammaystirnaa marka ilaahay baa mahadle bishii saddexaad baan ula wareegnay qaybtii u dambeysay mashruuca ee ah fidinta qaybiyada magaalada ama mashruucan aan hadda sheegayay 5 bilood gudahooda maanta waxaynu taagannahay bishu waxay tahay 28 bishii toddobaad waxaan bilownay bisha saddexaad kowdeeda 5 bilood weli totally may buuxsamin mashruucaas waanu dhammaystirnay waan ka soo faraxalanay ilaahay baa mahadale taasi waxay muujinaysaa dadaalka wakaaladda haye sidoo kale insha Allah Hargeysana waan u duceynaynaa biyaha ay heli doontana insha Allah waxaanu jecelnahay xataa inaynu ku dadaalno dhaamamka inaan kordhisano waayo biyaha ceelasha kaliya laguma tirsan karo marka intaas ku soo koobaya hadalkayga
waad mahadsan tahay kole waxaan u hadlayaa on behalf of Hargeysa cidii kale ee waxa weeyaan su'aal qabtana waxaan filayaa wasaaradii biyaha waxa weeyaan hadda wakaaladii biyaha noloshaad ku haysay ma filayaa marka wixii su'aalo kale waxaan u furi doonaa muxuu ahaa panelkan u furi doonaa intaana panelka furin waxaan rabaa injineer maxamuud hadduu iga raali noqon fadlan markaa bal su-aashii hore inaad waxa weeyaan inaad ku darsato waxa weeyaan contributionkaaga waad mahadsan tahay
Thank you, and thank you for your excellent presentation. Just to answer your question and in brief, we are not an authority as a part of foundation to select where we want to build a dam. We are always coordinating with the Ministry of Water Resources, and that's how we go where the priority is.
waad mahadsan tahay injineer maxamuud jazaaka allahu khayr thank you now waxaan siin doonaa waqtiga noo hadhay
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Abdul Fattah. And also, I will thank the panel, the very important panel. I will ask you one question. And Wilina Kusesa and Damamkio and Arinti Farah Foundation so bandicte. Marka damamka la qodo kadib ee lagu wareejiyo local community ga. How can and will be sustainable the marka local community ga lagu wareejiyo ay u sii socon kartaa hadduu challenge ka yimaadana local communities ka gaar ahaan special rural areas ka si looga taxadiri karaa in uu ka iman karo crisis ama challenge.
Let me and we will hand it over to Ken, and also we will hand it later.
Yeah, one last question, I suppose. Thank you so much for the presentation. To the Vero Foundation, I mean, it's great to hear about your work. As Muna mentioned, some of the important storage capacity is also underground, so I was wondering about how you think about, I mean, the presentation really focused on sort of a two-dimensional conceptualization of water storage. When you store water in the surface and you put a geomembrane under it, it does make it accessible to the community, but it also enables a lot of evaporation to happen that wouldn't otherwise necessarily happen if it's going to be stored in an aquifer. And then also the comparing the sort of geomembrane heifer dams and briquettes to the ones that don't have the geomembrane also maybe doesn't take into account the water that seeps not only into the aquifer but also into the vegetation around that area. So I was wondering how you would account for a more sort of three-dimensional model of what these dams are doing and their impact longer term on the local ecology. Thank you.
bismillahi raxmaan raxiim haddii aan ka jawaabo su-aasha koowaad ah dhaamamka marka community-ga lagu wareejiyo sidee bay sustainable u noqonayaan ama sidee bay usii waarayaan waxaan doonaya halkan yar waadixiyo dhaamka marka la go'aansado in community ama bulsho loo dhiso communitygaasi bilowga way la soo bilaabayaan waxay la soo bilaabayaan meesha dhaamka laga dhisayo bixinteeda sharci garaynteeda ayay la soo bilaabayaan shaqada dhaamku intay socoto qeyb bay ka yihiin dhaamku markuu gabagabo ku dhow yahay waxaa la sameeyaa guddi biyood guddida qeybta biyaha ama brograamka biyaha tababar siiya siday dhaamka u maamuli lahaayeen siday u dayactiri lahaayeen sida hadda wixii ku soo kordha dhaamka ay warka usoo siin lahaayeen maxaa la idhaahdaa qeybta biyaha ee xafiiska communitygaas haddana waxay iska soo dhex doortaan hal qof oo mas-uul ka noqda dhaamka furidiisa xidhidiisa waayo xilliga la cabayay iyo maxaa la idhahdaa iyo xilligaan la cabayn marna waa la furayaa marna waa la xidhayaa marka qofkaasina shaqada maalinlaha ah ayuu mas-uul ka yahay qofkaasi markaa guddidiina warbiskiina warbixinta qeybta biyaha ayuu la soo xidhiidhaya taa waxaa dheer kamaradahan aynu arkaynay magac baan u bixinay waxaan u bixinay camal cam calashaam camal waa maxay waa geeli marka maadaama geelu soomaalidu aad ay u jeceshahay oo xoolo qiimo badan uu yahay wadamo kaahil oo kalena ay caan ku tahay iyo maxaa la idhaha shan shacadda iyo biyo fadhiisinka ay aada ugu badan yihiin geelu waxaan idhi xoolaha weyn ugu mudan baynu magaca siinaynaa camal cam marka kamarada aynu u bixinay camal camkuna ay noogu xidhan tahay xogta waxay usoo diraysaa si joogta taas marka waxay noo muujinaysaa shaqadii dhaamku inay sidiisii ay u socoto sidoo kale intaa waxaa dheer qeybta researchku si waktila ah ayay u tagaan iyo qeybta i t-gu ay soo eegaan camal camki siduu shaqaynaya community wax cabashaamay qabaan marka faarin waxay kaga duwan tahay idii kale wuxuu maaha project based inta mashruuc dhisa laga yaacayo mashruuc kastoo dhaam oo la sameeyaa wuxuu ka mid yahay portfolioda guud ee faaro marka haddii la dhisay 2021kii kuwii 2022kii la dhisay iyo haddii layna gaarsiin la dhisi doono 2030 si isku mid ah ayay faaro uga war haynaysaa oo qabaysaa over to you
Thank you. So I'll try to answer your question, Daniel. It's such a good question, and I think it actually scratches the surface of several of the deeper questions at play here. And to be totally honest, I don't know if we have the answers. We've built 7 dams so far for a total capacity of about 319,000 cubic meters. Across this country, there's more than 1,000 dams that have been built. So what we've done is just a small fraction of what's been done. Now, the first time I came to Somaliland, what I was surprised to see were the dry riverbeds. And it was so puzzling to me because I had just sort of assumed that it'd be a very dry and arid landscape. But what the dry riverbeds said was that when it rains, there's a lot of runoff. So much water escapes out to sea. So I think that our starting point was, A, there's a lot of water that's lost, just immediate loss because there's not enough time for the ground to absorb it. And B, there's an immediate need for surface water. And so for Faro Foundation to build surface water capturing dams, it's not doing any harm, right? Now, one thing that has been very unsatisfying for us is that if our purpose is to provide water to the pastoralist communities, what we're not providing is fodder. And so animals will come through and collect water, but they're hungry too, and we're not fixing that problem, so maybe we're not actually solving it. And this is something that we're thinking very seriously about, what should we do? Another thing is that, you know, we're in a country and in a region where climate change is making drought increasingly likely. So are we truly boosting the adaptation potential of the country by digging more dams? Or would we actually be making adaptation better if we were digging dams and finding other ways to support livelihoods that are not livestock oriented, right? Because the truth is that 10, 20, 30 years from now, how sustainable, how practical, how possible will it be for people to keep large herds when we could go several seasons without rain? So there's a lot of deep questions that I think your question alludes to. We have built a subsurface dam in one location so far, and the idea was that you slow down the flow of water underneath the ground or underneath the surface, and it helps recharge some of the neighboring boreholes. It's hard to measure the performance of those types of investments, which is another thing that you sometimes need. You need to show receipts of impact or progress in order to unlock more funds, right? So maybe that's something we should explore more of. But there's a lot of questions here. So with this effort, what we're trying to do is move away from the anecdotes and the assumptions and the hunches and try to actually collect real data on how communities are using these dams or what we can see from space about how much infrastructure is there and what we should fix first. And it's causing us to update our assumptions every 6 months or so on what we're doing, what the solution is. So that was my honest answer to this question, and we welcome any of you who are interested in this problem to reach out and give us your ideas.
Thank you so much. I want to first Ilaahay baa mahad leh markasta wax weeyaan waa Ilaahay baa mahad leh waxaan rabnaa inaan kusoo gabagabayno inaan u mahad noqono wax weeyaan idinkaan mahad noqono